friends, colleagues, and concerned citizens. Tonight we meet at a moment when the world's attention is again riveted on Eastern Europe. The battle between Ukraine and Russia is not merely a local conflict. It is a tremor that shakes the global economic order and reveals deep flaws in the way our world is organized. Ask yourself, why is it that a single regional war can send food prices soaring in Africa, fuel bills skyrocketing in Europe, and spark financial anxiety across the Americas? The answer lies not only in geopolitics, but in the structure of the capitalist system itself. Since the first shots were fired in 2014, and especially since the full-scale invasion of 2022, this conflict has been more than a struggle for territory. It has become a contest of economic systems and global influence. On one side, Russia seeks to reassert regional power, wagering that its vast natural resources, oil, gas, minerals, can withstand Western sanctions. On the other, Ukraine receives unprecedented military and financial support from NATO countries, with billions of dollars funneled into weaponry and reconstruction promises. Yet notice how, regardless of which flag is raised, the global capitalist economy turns crisis into opportunity for those at the top. Energy corporations have reaped record profits, while ordinary people everywhere face higher utility bills. Agricultural conglomerates speculate on grain markets while millions in poorer nations struggle to afford bread. War is proving once again to be good business for the few and an unbearable burden for the many. This is not accidental. It is how capitalism functions. It socializes risk, meaning we all bear the costs, while privatizing profit. Western sanctions, meant to weaken Russia, have also disrupted global supply chains, creating inflationary waves that hurt working families far beyond the war zone. In Europe, governments scramble to subsidize energy prices, while in the United States, the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, punishing workers and small businesses in the name of controlling inflation. The war becomes the convenient scapegoat for a deeper, long-standing problems, an economic system that cannot provide stability without exploitation and recurrent crisis. Let us also be honest. This is not a clash between good and evil, but between rival capitalist powers, each protecting its own interests. Russia defends its geopolitical sphere. The United States and its allies defend their markets and global dominance. Ordinary Ukrainians and Russians pay the ultimate price in lives lost and homes destroyed, while the international arms industry enjoys a historic boom. If we truly wish to end the cycle of war, of profiteering, of crisis, we must look beyond the surface of military strategy and confront the economic engine driving these conflicts. Worker cooperatives, democratic control of key industries, and international solidarity among working people are not utopian dreams. They are necessary steps toward a future where crises like this cannot be so easily monetized. The war between Ukraine and Russia has unleashed economic shockwaves that stretch far beyond the front lines, rattling markets and unsettling households across every continent. From the trading floors of New York and London to the streets of Nairobi and Karachi, few corners of the globe remain untouched. What began as a regional conflict has become a stress test for the world economy, exposing how tightly interwoven our supply chains are and how vulnerable ordinary people are when geopolitics erupts. Even those far removed from the battlefield feel the tremors in their daily lives through rising food costs, skyrocketing energy bills, and the creeping uncertainty that makes investors cautious and governments anxious. Consider energy first. Russia has long been one of the world's major suppliers of oil and natural gas, and Europe, in particular, has relied heavily on Russian pipelines to keep its industries running and its homes warm. When the fighting escalated and sanctions were imposed, energy markets reacted instantly. Prices spiked to levels not seen in years. forcing European nations to scramble for alternatives and pay a premium to secure liquefied natural gas from distant sources. For households from Berlin to Milan, this translated into electricity and heating costs that doubled or even tripled in a single winter. The shock did not stop at Europe's borders. Higher global oil prices pushed transportation and production costs upward everywhere, from American trucking fleets to Asian manufacturing hubs. In an economy already strained by pandemic-related disruptions, the war poured fuel on the inflationary fire. The impact on food markets has been equally dramatic. Ukraine and Russia together are often called the world's breadbasket, supplying a significant share of global wheat, corn, and sunflower oil. The war disrupted planting, harvesting, and shipping. Ports on the Black Sea, crucial export routes, became battlegrounds or were blocked by naval forces. Grain shipments slowed to a trickle, and futures prices for wheat shot up almost overnight. For millions of people in the Middle East and Africa, regions heavily dependent on Ukrainian grain, the result was immediate and severe. Nations such as Egypt and Lebanon, already wrestling with economic instability, suddenly faced the prospect of bread shortages and skyrocketing food prices, raising fears of political unrest and humanitarian crisis. Financial markets have absorbed these shocks with a mix of volatility and caution. Investors fled to so-called safe haven assets like gold and the U.S. dollar, while equity markets endured sharp swings as each new development from the front lines shaped expectations for energy supplies and central bank policy. The war became a catalyst for tightening monetary policy around the world. Central banks, particularly the U.S. Federal Reserve, responded to rising prices by raising interest rates aggressively, seeking to curb inflation. But higher rates also slowed borrowing and investment, squeezing small businesses and pushing mortgage costs higher for households already grappling with soaring living expenses. Emerging economies have felt the aftershocks even more acutely. Countries that rely on importing fuel or food faced the double blow of higher prices and a stronger dollar, which made their debt obligations more expensive. Some nations risk default as the cost of servicing dollar-denominated debt climbs, while social pressures intensify as citizens struggle with basic necessities. The war, in other words, has exposed the fragility of a global system where a conflict thousands of miles away can destabilize economies with no direct stake in the fighting. This is the hidden reach of the Ukraine-Russia conflict, a reminder that, in an era of deep economic interdependence, no crisis remains local for long. What begins as artillery fire in Donetsk or missile strikes in Kharkiv can, within weeks, ripple through supply chains, unsettle financial systems, and dictate the price of bread in far-off markets. It is a stark lesson in how geopolitics and economics intertwine, and in how quickly the fate of millions can hinge on the decisions of a few. While the war rages in Ukraine and headlines dwell on military maneuvers, a quieter drama is playing out in balance sheets and boardrooms. Profits for the few, pain for the many. This conflict has become a textbook case of how a global crisis can widen the gap between those with economic power and the vast majority who simply struggle to make ends meet. The contrast is stark and unsettling as ordinary families wrestle with soaring energy bills and the rising cost of food. A select group of corporations and investors are quietly celebrating some of the most lucrative quarters in their history. This is not a side effect of war. It is the way the global economic system is designed to function. Look first to the energy sector, the most visible beneficiary. When Russian oil and gas supplies were choked by sanctions and pipelines slowed to a trickle, global prices surged. That surge translated almost immediately into record profits for multinational energy giants. Companies such as Shell, ExxonMobil, and BP reported earnings that dwarfed those of previous years, in some cases shattering decades-old records. Shareholders enjoyed windfalls. Executives collected multi-million-dollar bonuses, and stock prices climbed while the rest of the world paid more at the pump and for basic heating. For a household in Paris or Chicago, filling the car or keeping the house warm became an exercise in financial anxiety. For the company selling that fuel, the war became a profit engine, a moment when scarcity itself was monetized. The arms industry tells a similar story. Every new shipment of weapons to Ukraine, every announcement of NATO members increasing defense budgets sends defense contractors' stocks higher. From Washington to Berlin, governments have pledged billions for new military equipment, and the firms that manufacture jets, drones, and munitions have seen their order books swell. These companies are not merely suppliers, they are political players with strong lobbying networks, ensuring that the stream of contracts remains steady. While soldiers and civilians face the terror of war on the ground, the manufacturers of weapons see their revenue forecasts brighten. The human cost of conflict becomes, in effect, a business opportunity. But the list of winners does not end there. Speculators in global commodity markets seized on the chaos to make money from volatility itself. As grain shipments slowed and wheat prices spiked, traders who bet on price swings made fortunes. Food conglomerates and large agricultural trading houses profited as scarcity pushed up margins. Meanwhile, families in Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Asia found that the price of a simple loaf of bread could double within weeks. For many, that is not a minor inconvenience, it is a matter of survival. Hunger protests erupted in several countries as people demanded relief. The profits earned in the hushed halls of commodity exchanges came directly at the expense of those who could least afford it. This pattern of crisis-driven enrichment is not a historical accident. Capitalism, by its very nature, rewards those who can control scarce resources when disruption occurs. The larger and more destabilizing the crisis, the greater the opportunity for those with capital and influence to turn chaos into cash. And it is not just corporations. The wealthiest individuals, those who own significant shares in energy, defense, or commodities, watch their portfolios swell as ordinary workers' wages fail to keep pace with inflation. For many households, the war's ripple effects mean choosing between heating and food or cutting back on essentials to cover a rent increase. For a handful of elites, it means a new yacht or a record-breaking dividend. The hook of this moment is impossible to ignore. A war that devastates cities and uproots millions is simultaneously a gold rush for those positioned to capitalize on instability. Politicians deliver speeches about sacrifice and shared burden, yet the burden falls overwhelmingly on the shoulders of ordinary people, while the rewards flow upward. The Ukraine-Russia conflict lays bare a brutal truth about the global economy. In times of peace or war, it is structured to funnel wealth toward those already at the top, leaving the majority to bear the cost of crises they did not create and cannot control. When Western nations first unveiled sweeping sanctions against Russia, the move was presented as a strategic masterstroke, a financial weapon meant to cripple Moscow's economy and hasten an end to the invasion. Yet, as weeks turned into months, the sanctions revealed a far more complicated and troubling reality. Far from being a clean blow against the Kremlin, the economic penalties have ricocheted through global markets, creating a chain reaction of disruption that many policymakers underestimated. The very tools designed to punish have instead exposed the fragility and interdependence of a global economy where no market stands alone. The hook here is striking. An attempt to isolate one country has ended up entangling everyone. Energy markets were the first to feel the sting. Russia's role as a leading exporter of oil and natural gas had long been acknowledged, but the depth of Europe's dependence became painfully clear only after the sanctions hit. European leaders scrambled to replace Russian pipeline gas, turning to liquefied natural gas imports from the United States and Qatar. Prices soared to record highs as competition for limited supply intensified. Households across the continent faced heating bills that doubled or tripled, while manufacturers that rely on steady energy supplies scaled back production or shut down altogether. What began as a targeted punishment for Russia became a self-inflicted wound for economies that once believed they could absorb the shock. The ripple effects did not stop with Europe. Higher global energy prices fed directly into inflation everywhere. Transportation costs for goods rose sharply, pushing up prices from groceries to electronics. For developing nations, the squeeze was even tighter. Many rely on imported fuel and food and borrow in US dollars. As the dollar strengthened in response to investors seeking a safe haven, these countries found their debts more expensive to service and their purchasing power diminished. The sanctions intended to discipline Russia magnified existing economic vulnerabilities in nations far removed from the conflict. Financial markets became a theater of volatility. Investors sought to reprice risk, sending currency values, bond yields, and stock markets into sharp swings. Central banks, especially the U.S. Federal Reserve, responded to the inflationary surge with aggressive interest rate hikes. That policy response slowed credit growth and dampened investment, threatening a global economic slowdown. Ironically, the very act of punishing Russia fed into the same inflationary pressures that forced central bankers to raise rates, which in turn made life more expensive and precarious for working families everywhere. Even the structure of global trade began to shift. Russia, rather than collapsing economically, redirected much of its energy exports toward Asia, striking deals with China and India at discounted prices. These transactions weakened the intended stranglehold of Western sanctions and underscored how resilient a resource-rich economy can be when alternative markets exist. For many observers, the lesson was clear: in a multipolar world, economic penalties can be rerouted, blunted, or even transformed into new trading patterns that diminish the influence of those who impose them. The unintended consequences have left governments scrambling for answers. European leaders debate new subsidies to shield households from soaring costs. Food importing countries in Africa and the Middle East call for emergency grain shipments and financial aid. Meanwhile, the very sanctions meant to isolate Russia have nudged nations like China, India, and Brazil toward tighter economic cooperation with Moscow, accelerating a slow but visible drift toward a more fragmented global order. This is the paradox at the heart of the sanctions strategy. A policy designed to weaken an adversary has revealed how deeply entwined the global economy truly is. Every attempt to contain Russia has also tightened the squeeze on allies and bystanders alike, proving that in an interconnected world, the shockwaves of punishment rarely stop at their intended target. From the earliest days of the Ukraine-Russia war, the narrative pushed by many political leaders has been cast in the simplest of terms: a battle of democracy versus autocracy, good versus evil, a clash of values that demands unwavering moral clarity. Yet beneath the lofty speeches and patriotic slogans lies a far more complicated reality, one driven less by ideals than by hard geopolitical and economic calculations. The conflict, for all the human suffering it has unleashed, is also a contest of markets, resources, and influence among rival capitalist powers. The hook that demands attention is this: behind the stirring language of freedom and sovereignty, The war reveals a naked struggle for dominance where the stakes are measured not only in territory, but in profit and power. For Russia, the motivations extend beyond the rhetoric of protecting ethnic Russians or resisting NATO expansion. Moscow's leadership sees Ukraine as a critical buffer zone and a region rich in natural and industrial resources, control over ports on the Black Sea, access to key energy routes, and influence over grain production are all strategic assets. The Kremlin's actions, while draped in nationalist justification, are inseparable from the economic imperative to secure markets and maintain leverage over Europe's energy dependence. Russia's use of natural gas exports as both an economic lifeline and a political weapon underscores that this is as much a contest of economic positioning as it is of military strategy. The Western response is no less driven by self-interest. The United States and its NATO allies frame their involvement as the defense of democratic principles, yet their policies also serve to protect long-standing economic and geopolitical dominance. By supporting Ukraine militarily and economically, Washington strengthens its role as the primary security guarantor of Europe, reinforcing transatlantic ties and ensuring that the continent remains reliant on American energy exports and defense technology. European allies, while publicly united, also weigh the economic opportunities that arise from reducing reliance on Russian energy and reconfiguring supply chains toward more favorable partners. This is not to suggest that principles are absent, but to highlight that morality is often deployed as a rallying banner, while the deeper contest plays out in the realm of economics and influence. The global arms industry illustrates this duality starkly. Every shipment of advanced weaponry to Ukraine represents both a statement of solidarity and a lucrative contract for defense contractors. Military aid packages are often measured in billions, and each billion translates into sustained profits for companies with close ties to policymakers. The rhetoric of defending democracy conveniently aligns with the interests of industries whose business model thrives on prolonged conflict and heightened insecurity. Beyond the immediate combatants, other major players are maneuvering to reshape the global balance. China and India, while officially neutral, seize the chance to buy discounted Russian energy and strengthen their roles as alternative centers of economic gravity. Their engagement signals the emergence of a more multipolar world where the dominance of the West can no longer be taken for granted. This reordering of alliances is not about moral alignment, but about securing long-term strategic and economic advantages. Ordinary people, whether in Kiev, Moscow, Berlin, or New York, experience this grand contest not as an abstract chess game, but as rising prices, economic uncertainty, and an endless news cycle of fear and tension. Yet the beneficiaries of this rivalry, energy giants, arms manufacturers, and political elites, accumulate power and wealth even as the human toll mounts. The narrative of noble ideals provides a cover for a competition rooted in the same capitalist logic that has long-turned crises into opportunities for profit and influence. The Ukraine-Russia war, stripped of its moral packaging, stands as a reminder that in international politics, the language of virtue often masks the oldest motive of all, the pursuit of power and the protection of economic privilege.